Hey guys, let's build a spider. As always, the first step here is choosing the parts we want to build the piece out of. I have loads of these lights in my studio and pretty often one of the bulbs dies, so I figured why not take some of the broken ones and turn them into something a little bit more fun. I need a couple of nuts to work for the thorax, so I chose some that will fit well with the bulb, which will serve as the abdomen here. I've got a pretty good variety, with most of these being ones I've just found on the street when I'm out and about, so it's not hard to find a couple that work. A lighter igniter that I found on the street is always my go-to head when making spiders, and once we throw in some assorted nails, that's basically everything we need. Now, I've made a fair few spiders over the years, some big, some small, but there's one thing that everyone's been asking to see, and I'm finally listening, so legally I think you have to leave a like. With some LEDs secured, it's time to build the circuit. Despite this being my second video with an integrated circuit, this was actually filmed first, so I had to spend a while figuring out how I was going to integrate the circuit into the build without it being too obvious. In terms of components, we have a housing for the battery, a switch to turn it on and off, 3 LEDs, 1 red and 2 yellow, and 3 resistors with the bigger one for the red LED. And once we put this all together, we should have a nice little light up spider. Now, in my Firefly video, you guys gave me a ton of helpful advice after seeing some of the terrible soldering and general circuit making mistakes. I have listened to you, but like I said, this was actually filmed before I built the Firefly, so if anything, I'm actually going to be even worse, so please forgive me for that. I started off by gluing the 2 yellow LEDs together. This will make it easier to solder them together and then to thread them inside the bulb. Here, we kick this off with a great example of me not being very good at soldering. I promise I'm going to get my hands on some flux for the next build, so just please bear with me. The magnifying lamp looked nice on the video here, but was actually getting in my way, so I just held the LEDs instead, and eventually I got them soldered nicely together. With that done, I glued the red LED into the fold and went about repeating the soldering process to get all 3 of them joined up. This went a bit better than the last attempt, and I got started working on the abdomen. What I need to do here is cut the end of the bulb off so I can hollow out the inside, giving me the space and access to thread the LEDs in. My Dremel cutting wheel actually got through this really easily, so I was being pretty careful to not take off too much material because with the metal being so thin, it was really easy to slip and cut straight through what I wanted to keep. Typically, I ended up getting slightly bored by the slow progress being careful was resulting in, meaning I started to rush, slipped slightly and cut deeper than I wanted. So I chopped it back a little further and this cleaned it up quite a bit. This had given me access, but I still need to remove all of the innards without smashing the bulb, so I switched to a little grinding attachment. Here I actually really did have to be careful because I gotta admit this wasn't the first attempt. A few brave bulbs had already sacrificed themselves in the pursuit of spider themed reincarnation and I really didn't want to smash anymore. This was all taking a lot longer than I thought it would, and for some reason I'd set myself a deadline of making not 1 but 3 of these guys in the next 4 days. This is something that I tend to do. I end up getting an idea and being really excited about it and give myself a completely unrealistic deadline to get it done and share it with you guys. Then when things inevitably start going wrong, God, I'm really struggling today. I found myself stressed and burnt out as I try and keep up with my own expectations. I'm very stressed and running out of time. I'm also a bit of a perfectionist, so sometimes this leads me to completely abandon the project if I feel like I'm failing at it. An obvious downside to running this business by myself is that when things aren't going right, it's all on me and I don't really have anyone to talk to about it. Which brings me to my paid partner, BetterHelp. Anxiety and stress often peaks in springtime, and BetterHelp enables you to find someone to speak to by connecting you with a therapist who can provide support. It's really easy to start. You just fill out a questionnaire and they connect you with a credentialed therapist as soon as possible. And the great thing is you can easily switch therapists anytime at no extra cost if it's not the right fit. The majority of members seek support for anxiety and 69% report improved anxiety symptoms after 6 weeks of therapy with BetterHelp. With over 7,000 reviews and a 4.3 rating on Trustpilot, BetterHelp is a platform that you can trust. Let BetterHelp help you rule your anxiety so it doesn't rule you. Click the link in the description or go to betterhelp.com/SackMissGreed for 10% off your first month of therapy. Luckily, my previous attempts at served as good practice, and this one was going way better. You can see here it was filling up with dust from all the grinding, which you might remember had been a bit of a nightmare to remove when building the Firefly. But here, it didn't really give me any problems, and I managed to get it all out after detaching the innards. Once those are broken off, I cleaned up the brake a little. I had enough space to fit the LEDs inside and used some tweezers to just pull everything out. It didn't quite want to leave, so after some precise smashing with the tweezers, I was able to coax it out. It was still a bit dusty inside, so I used some compressed air to clean up what I couldn't reach. With that done, it was time to revisit the circuit. I need a wire to connect all the components, so soldered one end to the cathode of the LEDs, which allowed me to thread everything into the bulb to get an idea of how it would look. With that sorted, I needed to incorporate the resistors. I'm using two 47 ohm resistors for the yellow LEDs and a 56 ohm resistor for the red LED. Frankly, I could have gotten this calculation entirely wrong. So if I have, please let me know in the comments as politely, or not, as possible. To make it a bit easier to hold everything together, I glued the two 47 resistors to act as a bit of a shelf for the larger 56 one. Once that was glued on, it made it a lot easier to solder in place. Not that you'd know that from this video because I'm quite clearly doing a terrible job of it. Thanks to the magic of editing, I managed to get it right on my second try. All that was really left was to solder the other ends of the resistors together so that I'd be able to attach a single wire later. I checked the circuit actually worked and we had some working lights. I figured I wanted a break from the soldering and went back to working on the abdomen as a whole. Thanks to the super glue, everything was nice and neat so it would easily thread inside of the bulb, but I still needed a way to actually fix it in place there. The fix I came up with was I glued a small nut to the resistors and checked this slotted in nicely with the bulb, which it did. So after making sure the position of the LEDs inside looked good, I went to join them together. I thought that welding this would be fine, but as it turns out, the bulb metal was just too thin and friable and I was just eating straight through it. Because I don't learn, I carried on trying to make this work for some time, before eventually accepting defeat and supergluing it together off camera. Add another larger nut, which I made sure was weldable while my recent failure was still fresh in my mind. Happy it worked, it was time to start on the thorax. I need to make sure that I'll be able to attach the head, abdomen and legs to the thorax later, and so far, it's not going to be able to do any of that. I added this washer in place so that I could have somewhere to weld the nut on the abdomen, but not block off where I need the wires to feed through later. This looked good, so I welded it in place properly. I double checked this actually looked right and welded the abdomen at a bit of an angle so the spider would have a more lifelike dynamic pose. Before I actually commit to this positioning, I made sure it looked good from all angles and tried to imagine how it would look once the piece was finished. I was happy with it, so I went about strengthening the weld and used some super glue to attach the battery holder on the bottom. Honestly, I wish I could have integrated this a bit better, as I feel it sticks out just a bit too much, but this was the best I could come up with. Back working on the circuit, I welded the black wire to the end of the resistors and miraculously, the whole thing still worked. We were still missing one component though, a switch. I glued this little latching push button switch to the top of the bulb. It didn't actually attach very well, as there wasn't much contact between the bulb and the switch, so I threaded a couple of small nails into the gaps to make it fit better. After measuring the distance to make sure it would be able to reach, I trimmed and stripped the wire between the battery holder and the switch so that I could solder it in place. I was finding it hard to get this to work, as the wire kept falling out of place, so I turned to my trusty friend, Blue Tack. This made it way easier and I was able to solder it without most of the usual fuss. I needed to join up the other side, so I took another wire section, soldering it to the battery holder and trimming it to length and soldering the other end of the switch. With everything somehow actually working, I only had one final connection to solder for the circuit. I measured and trimmed the red wire so that it would reach the battery holder and stripped it so I had a good length to wrap around and get a good connection. This soldered fairly easily, and yeah, I know it looks like a bit of a horrible connection, but hey, it lights up, which is further than I honestly thought I was going to get on this build at one point. I spent a while admiring this and playing around with the switch. With the circuit completely finished and only able to procrastinate for so long, it was time to get back working on the thorax. I still have a big hole on the other side of the nut that I need to sort out, so I have a way to attach the head later. The simplest thing I could think of to do is to just weld a small nail across the center of the hole to serve as an anchor point. Here I'm taking 2 small washers and welding them together to essentially make a slightly thicker washer to have the head stick out just a little bit more. I made sure to wait until it had cooled down before touching it. Wait, no, of course I didn't. Being the incredibly patient man that I am, instead of leaving it alone, I used the famous hot potato method to bring the temperature down. This fitted how I wanted it to, so I welded it to the thorax, as always, checking the angles to make sure the head would sit how I wanted later. Now, here's kind of the beginning of where things start to go wrong. I'm welding some screws to the thorax to attach the legs to later. As you can see, this already isn't going great. I managed to fuse the electrode to the screws here, and actually had to spend quite a while separating them as they really wanted to keep hanging out. Once I had broken them up and replaced the electrode, I tried again. This didn't go worse, but that's more to do with how low I had set the bar than anything else. I managed to get it to just about attach, and after comparing it to the next screw I'll be adding, I get working on strengthening the weld. Attaching the second one seemed like it was going on a bit easier. You can see that wasn't actually the case at all. Every time I thought I got it fixed in place, it just fell right off. After another few failed attempts, I grabbed another screw as if the other one just had bad vibes. Turns out maybe it did, as I managed to get that one to join a lot quicker. Seeing as I'd ruined a couple of the screws I wanted to use already, I decided to switch it up and use different ones for the outer set. After a not so brief struggle to pick them up, I started welding and got the back one attached, and then finished up with the front. Honestly, I don't think either of these screws were made from particularly compatible metals, which would explain why I was having so much trouble welding them. But they happened to be the ones I had, so what's a guy to do? This looked pretty good, so I went around replicating the same thing on the other side. To try and make it a bit easier to attach them this time, I sanded down the side so I could fit them more flush with the thorax and hopefully get a better weld. This actually seemed to help, and I was able to get the middle two on pretty easily. That being said, I was very conscious of how much I'd struggled before, so I was being really careful and thorough to try and get some good welds. After making sure everything was nice and strong, I joined the back and front ones on as well. I managed to get these on nicely, and just to play it safe, spent quite a while going over everything to make sure I'd done a good job. Later, it will become apparent that I had not. I actually really like the colour variation here of having half golden and half silver coloured screws, just to give like an extra bit of variety to it. Now, it was time for the legs. The legs are going to be really simple, made from 3 different size nails. Here, I'm a bit more in my usual rhythm. I've made enough spiders that I can picture them in my mind, and deciding how I want these legs to work doesn't really require much planning. After briefly losing the ability to pick up the smallest of these, I quickly had a leg welded up. The only difficult bit here is deciding what angles to have the legs at. I'm just making some small bends here and there to change the angles and compare with the body until I find something that I'm happy with. Once I think it's good, I can strengthen it and start welding up some more legs. I'll make sure that there's a few different angles spread out between these so that the legs don't all look too uniform. If you have every leg being identical, then the spider just looks unnatural. I know that sounds strange considering it's going to be made out of nails and a light bulb, but my main goal with all my sculptures is to make it look like a living thing, despite it clearly being made out of lifeless materials. I do still want it to be symmetrical though, so once I'm happy with the leg, I'll make one that matches to go on the opposite side. To make this a little easier, I just hold the leg I've already done next to the one I'm welding, and that way I can see that the angle is going to be the same. This was all going great, which really should have tipped me off that something was about to go wrong. You can see here the weld is all black and bubbly, which means it's weak and brittle. This is because I've run out of argon. This usually tends to happen when I'm on a deadline and stressed, and just always really brightens my day. I managed to get some delivered for the next day, so pick things back up without too much of an interruption. Continuing to weld up more legs and only burning myself occasionally in the process. You can see here the weld is much cleaner and way stronger thanks to the argon. Argon is used as a shielding gas when welding. Basically, as the weld's forming, the metals couldn't react with gases like oxygen in the air. Oof, you can tell that one actually hurt thanks to my cry of anguish. Anyway, so like I was saying, gases like oxygen in the air, which makes them brittle and impure, so a lot weaker. Argon, on the other hand, is inert, which means it's really stable and won't react with the weld, so you get a much stronger weld forming. I carried on making more welds, small adjustments to the angles here and there, mostly all going well. The occasional fusing of the electrode to the weld here and there, but hey, it was perfect, right? With the final leg welded, I had a complete set ready to go. I was clearly excited about this and decided that a few terribly framed shots of me pointing at them didn't quite do it justice, so adjusted the camera to actually capture the important stuff. Which, honestly, I think I should probably do a bit more of, seeing as making videos is basically 50% of my job these days. Now, at this point I'm thinking, okay, the hard part is over and attaching the legs is going to be a nice, relaxing final step. Unfortunately, as usual, I was wrong. Getting the angles right here really weren't working, and I was having to try over and over and over again. Once I'd actually got the first one on in a position I was happy with, it was just the same issue, if not worse, trying to get a matching front leg. I don't really know how I kept doing it, but I'd go to weld with the right angle, and as soon as I had a look out from under the microscope, I'd see that I'd gotten it completely wrong. To make things even more fun, once I thought I had actually gotten it to work, the entire leg, including the screw joining it to the thorax, came off. To get this join back on at the right angle took so many attempts, as I could never quite get it perfect. In fact, I couldn't really get it close to perfect, I could just get it bad. I was having to do a weak weld, check it, then bend the leg enough to get a better angle, but being really careful to not break the very weak weld that I just made. This was a balance that I did not manage to get right very quick. This felt like one step forward, 3 steps back, and what's been about 60 seconds of this video was probably about 20 minutes in real life. I snapped off the legs and went back to welding the thorax screw on to hopefully make it easier to attach the legs if that was strongly joined. I think this was getting to me by now, as I was attaching the leg at the worst angles and having to make huge adjustments to try and get something usable out of it, making things way harder than they needed to be. These big adjustments were putting a load of strain on the thorax screw, so I kept having to reattach it. I decided I needed to make this stronger, so went about adding some small metal slivers to bulk out the weld and add some strength. As you can see, I wasn't letting any of this get to me at all and stayed calm and collected the entire way through.
My life!
Okay, maybe it was getting to me a little bit. With a bunch of these metal slivers added, the entire structure was a lot stronger, so it should make things easier from here. I quite liked the angle of the first leg here, so decided to just commit and weld it properly in place so there was no going back. Now I just needed to get the other front one to match. Unfortunately, I didn't manage to hit this first go, or the second. In fact, I think I probably had about 10 attempts here, to varying degrees of failure. This was taking years off my lifespan and I just wasn't getting any closer to making progress, so I decided to switch up my approach. I took some blue tack and used it to hold the body of the spider how I'd like it to be eventually positioned. Oh, that's great. While editing, I've just seen that somehow one of the metal slivers I was adding to build strength has ended up inside the bulb. I'm sure that'll be both easy and fun to remove and definitely won't take me ages. This setup means I can go freehand and should be able to weld the legs at the perfect angle, if I attach the welding electrode, that is. Using the magnifying lamp here really helps me see what I'm doing and gives me a better chance of not welding the wrong thing. Once I've got a couple of welds in place, I can then go back under the microscope and make sure it's really strong. With this new positioning, I decided I need to change a couple of angles on some of the legs, just using some pliers to bend the nails into a slightly more sensible position. For some reason, I tried again just attaching a leg under the microscope. Seeing as I instantly messed this up again, I actually learned from my mistakes for once and went back to my freehand method. I'm not sure why I seem so anti doing it this way for this build, seeing as this is normally how I build spiders. That's not to say that this method is perfect, because I can't see what I'm doing as well, and a lot of the time they're too weakly welded to actually survive the 20cm journey to get welded under the microscope. Once I had eventually found the leg that had fallen off, I got back to adding legs on. I think I got in a bit cocky because I've made a few of these guys before and thought, I can quickly knock some of these out, and was just skipping steps that I took usually. Apparently that leg had been going on and on about how great it was on the floor, and the blue tack decided to check it out as well. Ironically, my attempts to save time ended up costing me way more than if I hadn't tried to cut any corners in the first place, which is usually what happens when I try and cut corners. With 5 legs added on, it was strong enough to stand in the zone, which made things a lot easier from there. Not easy, clearly, but a little bit easier nonetheless. With only 2 legs left to add on, it was looking quite spidery, so I went and strengthened everything I could, kind of treating this as a save point for my progress. As you add legs and it gets more crowded, there's less space for me to maneuver the welder, and it can be tricky to get the right angles to weld at every spot. That being said, the last 2 went on really quite nicely, and wasn't too hard to make sure everything was really strong. For one of my simpler builds, this guy had really given me some grief, and I still had another 2 to make. But right now, I didn't really care about that because I just love how it looks lit up. I was actually so distracted by this that I almost forgot I still had to add the head on. That being said, I think I deserved a little time to admire it before getting started on the final step. For the head of spiders, I've always used strikers from lighters that I find in the street. I like that they're a recognisable part, and also that I'm using some junk that leaves the streets a little bit cleaner. This is really easy to attach, just a little bit of super glue to join it on. It would have been even easier if I put it on straight, but it was easy enough to get right on the second attempt. To add some points of contact and make it a little bit stronger, I just added a small bit of metal, and there we had it. Despite the fact that this guy had given me so much trouble when I was expecting a nice easy build, I was really happy with him. Having the built-in light is just so cool, and I don't think I'll ever be able to make a spider the regular way again. Jump forward in time, and here we had 2 together. I love the way these guys look with the lights off, and they really light up the studio. Get it? You know, because for the 3rd one, I decided to make it a bit larger just to give a bit of variety to the gang. I hope you guys like this one. Let me know what you want me to make next, and as always, a huge thank you to those of you who support me on Patreon. Catch you guys in the next one.